So this means, but the man whose delight is the self alone, who is content with the self, who is satisfied with the self, for him there exists no work that needs to be done. So Arjun is talking about not doing any work, but Sri Krishna shows in this verse that all the qualities that one must have in order not to do work. So Sri Krishna has described 3 states here, and these are the 3 important states. Now the first one is a person whose delight is the self alone. The second is a person who is content with the self, and the third is a person who is satisfied with the self. So the first is a person whose delight is the self alone, the second is a person who is content with the self, and the third is a person who is satisfied with the self. So we'll go on to look and evaluate what the 3 differences are here. When a person's delight is the self alone, then he can continue developing himself until he's satisfied with himself. And after he's achieved this, then there exists no work that needs to be done. What is the first state of this sort of man whose delight is the self alone? Once this person has sort of this person has actually experienced the magic of the soul on a single occasion, and he experiences the strength of the soul. And this can be sort of either within himself or within another person. And this person has seen spiritual strength, and he now feels that this experience is a beautiful one and should last forever. And therefore he makes efforts to strive towards this and to achieve this. And he has a constant wish that this state should remain. He sort of begins to enjoy the bliss of the soul, and it's very much a beginner's stage, and therefore there's no sort of steadiness in this experience of the soul, but it's an initial starting point for the stage. So that's the first one, the one whose delight is in the self alone. The second is when a person continues his efforts, he becomes content with the self. So at that stage, he actually experiences the soul, and he has the attitude that he doesn't want anything apart from that particular experience. He's increased the frequency that he has with the experience of the soul, and he's therefore more determined to know this bliss, and he knows that this bliss is the greatest bliss, so he doesn't want anything else apart from that anymore. The first stage was efforts, and the second stage is sort of straightforwardness, where he knows it's completely natural to him. He doesn't have to make those efforts anymore to strive towards it. Now there's no tensions to make those efforts to be able to experience the soul again and again. It's like when a person's thirsty and he drinks water and he realizes that he was wasting his time suffering from thirst and he should have had water all along. He keeps thinking about how he can get water, and now he always just wants to be with water. And this is the first stage, and therefore he makes efforts to run wherever there is water. And in the second stage, he's always near water. Wherever he wants, he can get water because there's a tap nearby, and so he's not worried. The third stage is the one who is satisfied with the self, so this is a different one. And this is actually a stage even above this. So a person who is satisfied with the self, at this stage in life, the person's never unsatisfied with their life. A person is never not united with their soul. He realizes that his soul is his own, and that it was his mistake that he spent time away from the soul, and that it wasn't someone else's mistake. And he also realizes that it's easily available, that it belongs to him. And he realizes how much his efforts were a waste, and that he was running around for no reason, that it belongs to him. He realizes that the soul is eternal, and that once someone has reached the stage, then you see the satisfaction on his face. And you see in all his actions that he commits, he's always content, he's always happy. You never hear a complaint about his life, and, it's a quality of someone who's really happy and content within themselves. And if you ever find a person like this, then don't leave them. You always find this person sort of quite fortunate, and you'll also be considered to be quite fortunate to meet such a person, and you'll develop yourself with your companionship with this person. So sadly, what actually happens in the lives of the majority of people is that they just sort of stay with people that they're not satisfied with. They're always complaining about something. Oh, it's raining, or it's cold, it's hot, it's something's wrong. It's the nature of people that when you meet them, it's a really British day. Oh, it's too hot today, it's too cold, or it's too rainy. Something always has to be bad. There's nothing that they're actually content about. And this person's always going to complain. It doesn't matter what the situation is. You just can't change it. And that person sort of is not satisfied. But a person, on the other hand, is satisfied with the self, will never complain about life, because they have this understanding about who they are and what the soul is. If you stay with this person, then you'll always be successful in your own lives as well, because you can develop through being surrounded by these types of people. There's actually a really nice story that comes in the Panchatantra, and it's about a fox and a lion who go to a hotel. It's quite an interesting story, quite funny, because they go to a table and they sit down, And the waiter walks over and he asks the fox for the order. And it was natural to him to ask the fox first, not the lion. And the fox said that he'd like 1 plate of savouries, 1 plate of sweets, and 1 cup of tea. The waiter then looks at the lion and asks if he wants something, because, you know, if he didn't order anything, then he was obviously going to be hungry. And the fox was really smart and said, you know, the lion is not hungry, and that's the only reason why I'm sitting here, because if the lion was hungry, then I'd be dead by now. I would have been swallowed up. You know, I'd be finished. So it's because the lion is content and satisfied that the fox is actually able to sit down and eat calmly. Otherwise, he's not going to be able to be content. He's not going to be able to think he can eat, because he's constantly in fear for his life. You know, so if the lion wasn't satisfied, then a fox would actually be finished. And in the same way, in life, if you sit around and sort of stay with someone who's not satisfied, then they will also finish you off. You know, it's because that person is unsatisfied and hungry, and they'll need to place their, you know, dissatisfaction and sadness on someone else. And it's only when you hang around with those that are sort of satisfied that you're able to develop. So I think, you know, that the important thing here is to surround oneself that are content, you know, with people who are contented, so that we can thrive and reap benefits from them as well. Even if there's an ordinary person that's satisfied with life, then you'll be happy. So if you sit with someone, I'm sure people have experienced this, and you sit with someone who's unhappy or complaining about something, you'll constantly sort of feel tension. If you're sitting with someone who's peaceful and happy, you feel at peace and you feel happy. But if you sit with someone who's moaning that something's wrong and this is wrong and that's wrong, and you know, that gives you a sense of tension. You're not able to relax. And on the other hand, the person who's constantly contented doesn't actually have any work to do necessarily in his life, because he's content. You know, he doesn't have any experiences or people missing. He doesn't feel incomplete or lacking within himself, and he doesn't need to do anything to fill that void. As soon as that person thinks about what they should do to fill that void, that there's no, you know, there's a need to act. But the person that's actually satisfied doesn't have that void, and therefore doesn't need to work to fill that void. And secondly, sort of when a person is sad or worried, then he needs to work to get rid of that sorrow or that worry. And in that state, that person is, you know, sort of thinking about the circumstances outside of himself that would make him happy. And when he sort of looks at that, only then, from the outside, only then will he be happy. When you need to get something from the outside, there's no need to act. But when one knows that he is not necessarily sad, then he doesn't have a reason to act. When this feeling of completeness becomes constant, there's no selfishness left in the person, because he's satisfied with the soul, and there's no work left to do. So this will then make us wonder, well, if there's no work left to do, what do you do? Do you still act? And the next verse will actually show us what is it that you're meant to do. So we'll move on to the last one.